Okay. All right, everyone. Well, I appreciate you joining. Looks like we have at least 9 or 10 here, so we'll get started. If you have to leave for any reason, we will have this recorded, so you will have the ability to kind of pull it up at your will. You know, the intention is that it may take the whole hour. So let me just make sure we have. Are you guys seeing the shared slide still? Yep. Okay, good. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. This is essentially going to be an overview of rewarding and retaining key employees. And so the first thing I want to do is just kind of talk about, you know, why does this come up and what is it about? So we know that we have key employees that we love and cherish, and we might be actually looking to recruit new employees, that kind of thing. At the end of the day, those of you who've attended our HR summits or have seen in our peer group meetings, we talk about their package, right? You might have a true cost of labor set up on an employee and say, well, here's your salary, here's your benefits, this is what you get. There's a couple of pieces I want to highlight on this triangle. One is a word called qualified plans. And remember that is going to be things that are governed by ERISA, like 401k and things like that. And then down in the bottom left, you're going to see long-term incentives, which are any kind of performance pay or retention plan, which is a non-qualified benefit that we're going to be talking about today. And then over to the right, you may have some annual incentives, short-term incentives for performance. You might do some things like discretionary bonuses, holiday plans, and stuff like that. So those all make up a package for an employee. And what we recommend is, no matter what choice you make around any of these things, that when you have that discussion with the employee about their standing with the company, absolutely have a what I would consider a true cost of labor spreadsheet out, so you can talk about all the different benefits that they're receiving. All right, so let's move on. So now we're going to talk about business entity suitability. This concept is very important going forward, because we need to know, you know, what is the culture of your business, what is your predisposition as a business owner, what will work in your business, right? So there's two elements of business entity suitability that we talk about when we meet with you to talk about these types of plans. One is employer control, and the other one is the employee benefit security. So those are different things. One obviously is you, the owner. If you're an owner, if you're an employee, you're thinking in terms of, well, what's my benefit and how secure is that benefit? So those are two opposite ends of a spectrum that we're going to talk about. So qualified plans, you heard me mention, that is your 401ks, that's your pensions, that's anything that is governed by ERISA, and we'll talk about what that means. Second piece is non-qualified plans, and that's where you have a lot more flexibility and design. You can be more creative as a business entity. So again, 401ks, pensions, non-qual is going to be a SERP, supplemental executive retirement plans. There's a whole bunch of different names, long-term incentive plans, LTIs, things like that. Deferred comp is DC. So the 401k pension plan has the least amount of employer control. When you put this plan in place, you can change the plan over time, but you really can't discriminate or any of those things when it comes between employees. You can do a management level and a normal level, but for the most part, you don't have that flexibility. And then I would say the most employer control would be the non-qualified plan, which is the deferred comp and things like that. We'll talk about what that means, you having more control. So obviously the opposite of this would be that if I'm an employee, a qualified plan is more secure. I'm going to feel more comfortable with it. A non-qualified plan might make me a little bit nervous. And so that's least employee benefit security. Now there's ways to make an employee more secure. You might hear a term called a rabbi trust at some point. We can talk about that at some point. So again, that side of suitability is ERISA governed, very much protected by your rights as an employee. And then this side is not governed. It really gives you a kind of a freewheeling Wild West environment to work in. And it can be really powerful because it allows for some really nice discrimination, if you can say discrimination is nice, but you certainly have the ability to do some things with the employees there. So where are you? I made this little graph. Is a horrible slide. I literally did it 2 minutes ago. The reason why is we have probably about 30 different equipment rental and party and event stores that have gone through this process of designing a plan, and they're all over the map, right? They want to be fair to the employee. Another one wants to put a big giant bucket of money on at the end of somebody's career. So it's more employer controlled, less employee controlled. Some people want to have vesting included and things like that. So that's certainly part of this design process, and we'll talk about that. So if you look at that, I literally every January 1st, I have to create a report on cash and get that out to the members so that they can, do whatever they got to do from an accounting standpoint with it. But more importantly, it just reminds me how different every single equipment rental and party and event rental company has designed their plan. So next up, 2 things you should remember at all times, and this is always important. There are 2 separate things to this discussion. One is the plan design, which doesn't have anything to do with money. It literally is, taking a blank piece of paper and kind of writing up what you would consider a fair and equitable plan with your employees as you see it. So that's the design. It has nothing to do with funding. It has nothing to do with, do you have the money in place to do it? I've worked with equipment rental operations who've created a really beautiful plan design, put it in place, rolled it out, and didn't finance it. So we can talk about what that means later on. Secondly, I've done other meetings where people say, well, I really don't have my design finalized in my head, but I know I want to start building up money for that design. So they've already moved forward with plan financing without actually finishing the plan or implementing the plan or rolling out the plan to the employees. So they're 2 separate things. Always keep that in mind when you're thinking about this. So first thing is non-qualified plans. That's the space we're talking about. Tremendous flexibility, a lot of freedom to design what you wanted to design. And so again, they have their existing benefits. How do I go about locking in somebody further? Zoe's been with me almost 3 years. I guarantee you, if she hits this 3-year mark, she's getting one of these non-qualified plans. It's an added benefit that's not governed by ERISA. We can do some really cool stuff with it. This advantage is discretionary, at the owner's discretion. You design it. It's discriminatory. There's a lot of flexibility in how you design it, and there's no limitations or restrictions, no governance over it at this point. There's minimal government reporting. What we do is we inform the Department of Labor that there is a non-qualified plan that's been rolled out, but we don't give them any of the details on that. I'm not quite sure why that's there, probably just in case something changes way down the line and there's going to be some tax somewhere. But right now, that's all we've been asked to do from the government standpoint. So non-qualified plan goals. So we have seen our members use this to recruit key management talent. We just had some movement in the ranks on the West Coast where deferred comp was a big part of the package, which lured a key district manager into a lead rental manager position. And again, it was the ability to have that deferred comp and make it an offering as part of their package. Also, you could use it to motivate your key employees to work towards a company goal. This has been used with people who have said, hey, I want to design a phantom stock type program, where as my company goes, so goes the employees. I want them to participate in the upside and also feel a little bit of the downside. How do we design something like that? Obviously, if they meet their objectives and exceed their objectives, they could get rewarded. Sometimes people are rewarded for long-term longevity with the company. And again, if you have any concern about losing a person to a competitor down the road or a different industry, this is a nice retention piece. So we are going to talk about an example of a non-qualified deferred comp plan. They go by many different names. All of our equipment rental and party event rental operators have created their own name for their plan as they roll it out. And you have the freedom to do that because there's so much discretion. So we look to see what fits the company goals, and it could be these types of things. So number one is, who's going to participate in this plan? You might say, well, I want these 2 people participating right away, but I may open it up to 3 more down the road. We have some companies where 25% of their employees are in a plan. We have some companies where it's 1 person. So it can be any level. Again, we already talked about the incentive. And the other thing is the company controls the benefit with the ability to vest it. So what that means is as you design it, you may design elements to the plan that are very owner-centric, more in the owner's court than an employee's court, but the owner has the ability to change the plan going forward. Hey, we're going to vest you at the 10-year mark. You might not have offered that in the initial plan, but you may have said, from a comfort standpoint, this person has to get some piece of the pie, some part of the action by the 10-year mark. So that might be something you do. And the other piece is there is no current cost to the employee. And there is a cost to the employer, and we'll talk about what that might look like. But ultimately, it's a promise. And by the way, I actually correct myself there. There's no cost to the employee and there's no cost to the employer until the employer decides to start to identify funds that he would use to pay out that benefit. So you could technically go tomorrow, design a new plan, roll it out, and not sweat any of the details initially, because it's just a matter of making sure that when there's a vesting, when there's a commitment to pay, that the money is available. So advantage for the employer provides the retirement benefit, can be used during their course of employment as well. You can select a participant. It's not related. Those participants don't all have to get the same plan either. It could be different for each one. You're controlling the timing on the benefit as well as the amount of the benefit. You can use this to help a person in your company who might be behind the 8 ball on saving for retirement. We've seen that done again and again. A lot of guys, men and women in their 50s might not have what they need for retirement. This gives you a little bit of a chance to catch up on that. We find that's used for that. Also, we see a lot of, believe it or not, people helping out with divorces and divorce situations, because again, you pay for your college, your kids to go to school. You divorce, you split your assets down the middle, and voila, now you're going to have to work till you're, 80, 85 because you don't have that kind of retirement. So this gives you a chance to catch up. You can also establish vest. And by the way, regarding that, you can also elect for them to electively contribute to this type of plan and take advantage of some tax savings that might not have been available to them as an individual. We've had one person design a plan where they said, I don't want to contribute anything to this. I just want to make it available to our employees. And so that's something you can do in a non-qualified plan. It doesn't have to mean that the company has to spend money. And then establish a vesting schedule. That means different things to different people. We've seen a couple people in their 20s get locked up. They might get vested by year 5, year 10, where a portion of their retirement is guaranteed. And then as they get to retirement age, that money will be there. You also can design it in a way where you say, well, if you leave me at any point after your vesting, that can be a lump sum that goes in your pocket, that kind of thing. So that's another. And again, minimal reporting to the government, no real thing there. Now, here's the advantage to an employee. Obviously, they're receiving the benefit, right? It's a golden handcuff to some extent. They may participate in the distribution benefit options. Hey, I want a lump sum. I don't want a 20-year payout. I don't want a 10-year payout. They may be part of the conversation on the design of it, depending on your interest in that. There is no current cost to the employee. It certainly just goes right into their benefit package. they are not taxed on any benefits they receive until they receive them. So they may look at it and say, oh, I've got, I've vested, I invested 25% of $500,000 pension. It's 125,000. I'm guaranteed. They don't pay tax on that until they receive it in the form of a check. And this also avoids, obviously, any qualified plan limitations. There's no early distribution penalties and no mandatory age distributions that you might see with 401k or an IRA. So what are the employer responsibilities? So your responsibilities are, you have to formally document the plan. We actually provide that documentation to our members if they want to pursue it. It was written by a legal team in Lehigh Valley about 8 years ago. Nothing really has changed since that time, so it should be okay. You can certainly take that template and edit it and have it reviewed by your own legal team. You can communicate your plan benefits. Again, it has to be done in a way where it's like, hey, here's your participation piece, and this is what the plan looks like overall. You don't need to share what other people are getting or not getting in that plan. You need to provide for any ongoing plan administration. That essentially is your bookkeeper's activity. We don't recommend that you track the liability that you are promising someone until they're vested. So in that case, we have right now, I think 2 or 3 that have some vesting in place. We just make sure that the liability portion shows up on the balance sheet as a liability and unpaid liability. And then once it's paid, it will come off. And yeah, that's it. And then pay the benefit. So employee limitations are, the benefits are unsecured. So what does that mean? That means if you sell your business, if you get sued, if any of those things happen, the employee doesn't really have any rights. You may have some verbiage in related to a rabbi trust, which basically says, hey, your particular situation might be different than others. We're going to protect and guarantee certain portions of the benefit. And again, we can dig into that deeper if that's something somebody wants to look at. Usually what I tell people is just put like a plan, an exit plan for the plan if you're going to be selling to a third party. Third party might take it. I look at it, if I'm buying you and you've got a non-qualified plan in place, to me, it's great because it's a stay bonus now. Now I've got your people, they're essentially, unless you give them that benefit, they actually have to stay with the new buyer for a period of time. And then we'll allow for that benefit to come off. But to me, if I'm buying somebody, that's one of my concerns is how locked in are their employees? Is that something that can transfer to me as a new buyer? But it essentially is, I say like address it some way with the employee. In most cases, our members right now have elected to say, hey, if the buyer's not interested in this plan and we sell our business to the buyer, we are going to basically kill the plan and give you the proceeds where they stand. And so that's usually acceptable to most of the employees. They know that, hey, it's been earned up to this point and we're getting a piece of it. The plan depends on the employer's financial health and business continuation. So there have been a couple plans that have been suspended. I've been at this for 8 years inside the rental industry. So, a couple of these companies have said, whoa, can we put this on hold? Well, you're not really putting it on hold because depending on how you choose to finance it, they'll continue to grow. You typically see the money growing because it's put somewhere where there's still growth happening. So it's not, I wouldn't necessarily say it's truly suspended, but certainly if there's an employer health issue, it could affect this plan for the employee unless the employee is vested, then they're protected. And there are, right now, this type of thing has no loan provisions. We have done non-qualified deferred comp where an employee who vests a portion can borrow for kids' college or a mortgage or something like that out of their vested portion. Right now, we don't have a lot doing that, but I have been part of that in my past. And again, you can't roll this money into a 401k or an IRA. So how does this work? So first thing is employer-employee enter into a contractual agreement. So this is after you've already sat down with whoever you're working with to design it. Essentially you're saying, hey, you know, if you stay with, like a simple one would be stay to retirement. If you stay to retirement, this is what I'm willing to give you. And that's the design or the plan doc, how it would look. The employee is not taxed until they receive the benefit. We already talked about that. The benefits are paid from the employer cash flow at all times. That's how they get paid. So you might hear us talk about insurance in a minute, but it really is insurance acting as a bank account, creating the benefit inside your balance sheet that then you pull from to pay the benefit out to the employee. So it's always going to come from the employer cash flow. The employer's income tax deduction is postponed until there's a payout. That's very important to understand, because right now, if you contribute to 401k, that allows you to get the deduction up front, right? You're basically reducing your income and you're taking that deduction. In this particular case, we're saying, no, we'll pay tax on whatever we're doing. If we're using that type of tool, we'll pay tax on it now. And as it grows in value over time, we'll take the deduction later in life when the benefit is dispersed. So it's just the opposite. Very similar to a Roth IRA. So if you've ever seen a Roth IRA in place. So the employer may manage the obligation by setting aside current cash to informally finance that future benefit. They don't have to do that. We recommend they do that, and we'll tell you about that right now. So design options, there's usually two. One is to say, hey, I'm going to focus on the benefit. So Dan, can you please run me a illustration of a person receiving, I have, Lisa is 45 years old. She is the branch manager and she's going to retire from us at 65. So I want to make sure that we give her $300,000 when she retires. So that is a defined benefits where we identify the future benefit for a person, what they'll get. I like to use pension type payouts because it's a round number. People get it. Oh, I'm getting paid a pension. What does that mean? Well, you're going to get paid $300,000 between the age of 65 and 85. So they get that, right? They say, okay, so that means every year I'm going to get a W-2 or, oh, well, you might get a W-2, you might get a 1099, but it's going to be for one set amount. And by the time it's all done, you will have collected $300,000 out of the plan. Very easy for them to understand and define benefits. So that's what, in this particular example you're seeing up here, $50,000 for 15 years, or you might say something like, we'll give you 2% of your final salary times 20 years of service, right? So there's different ways you can design how the defined benefit looks. The second one is the contribution. So I believe Jen has one of these in place right now, and she has got a set amount of money that is being contributed every year on behalf of that employee into a plan. Because we illustrate it and because we look at it, we can say how much is in that. But it wasn't like we said to, Steve, hey, Steve, you're going to get $300,000 on your retirement date paid out over a period of time. We just said, as part of your relationship with us, we're contributing $10,000 a year, as long as you're an employee in good standing. And that $10,000 is going into this type of tool, and this tool is creating this type of return for you. So that's an defined contribution. I only have a couple of those in place right now. But it's doable. It's something that some people have elected to choose. Okay, so you can pay it out at retirement. We already talked about that. You might have a agreement to disagree and terminate employment, and that could be a time when you decide to make a benefit payout. A lot of our plans are designed where if you're fired or you quit, you forfeit the benefit. So the benefit stays with the company, it stays on the company balance sheet, it belongs to the owner. So that's what we see most of the operations choose something like that. You may have a provision in there that says if there's a case of disability, we will definitely, make good on some portion of it or whatnot. So the benefit could be paid out on disability. And then lastly, you might have death. So in a lot of the cases, I think probably 90% of the cases, they will use insurance as part of the instrument to grow. And so that's when they will end up using the death benefit that might be tied to an insurance policy to make good and split that possibly with the family of the deceased, or keep the company with the money, because it's essentially key man policy, key person policy, right? So the other option is you can have an agreement to say, man, us cutting you a check every 20 years or every year for 20 years is going to be a pain in the butt. We might say, we're going to give you the option for a lump sum as well. So just like you might win the lottery, oh, I won $100,000. Well, the lump sum at age 65 for that might be $48,000. So you give them that option to either take the payout over time or take the money in the lump sum, and that cleans it off your balance sheet and it's pretty quick and easy. All right, so informal financing rationale. So this is the idea. We're now done discussing the design of a plan, reward and retention plan. I mean, there's all sorts of things we didn't talk about. We could talk about, well, how do I do a phantom stock plan? Simply looking at the value of the company and how the value of the company changes over time, and then determining a share amount and a share price, and then making that part of a managed plan is a way to do that. So you just would need to, again, informally finance that commitment that you're making. So that's what we're going to talk about now is like, okay, well, how do I do that? And there's different ways to do it. Well, the reason why you should do it, these are some of the reasons why you should do it. Number one is obviously, this is a long way to say, hey, you're reducing your salaries on these people. I mean, they might not have the same salary growth that they would have had pre-deferred comp plan. If they're getting deferred compensation, they might not be pushing for a $4. I do this with lead mechanics a lot. They might not be pushing for a $4 an hour raise because, 2 years ago, we put $250,000 out there for them as a deferred comp plan. So the idea is the current allocation of dollars may remove the increasing financial burden on future management. Again, keeping their salaries low, that kind of thing. Also, the asset that you're choosing will offset that liability. That's the main reason. We need to have financing in place to offset the costs that we're going to be building up in this liability. It may minimize the impact on your earnings, and it may also enhance the company's balance sheet. All right. How are we doing on time here? Okay. Lastly, it can be designed to provide for a tax-deferred accumulation, and we're going to talk about that. Obviously, one way to do it is take your profit in your company and set it aside. I'm going to put $3,000 of profit away every year and let that build up, and I'm going to invest it in a money market fund and build up by 1% a year, or whatever it might be. Not the most effective way to put money aside for a golden handcuff type of plan that has way in the future where you're going to be having the need for the money. So financing alternatives you have available, you're going to pick the one that works best. One is pay as you go, which again is what we're talking about, just taking the profit, sticking it into the plan, having it there. If they're vested, then they get it right away. Not really much of a handcuff, right? That's not really a deferred comp. The second one is taxable assets. So people say, oh, the stock market's doing great. Let's just stick the money. Let's take $10,000 a year and stick it in the stock market, let it run. We'll manage that portfolio, and that's where we'll, use the money. And again, there's different pluses and minuses to that, so we'll get into that. Yeah, please, whoever's writing things down, please stop writing them down. I have so much material on this I can send you, plus these slides. So no, don't take any notes. And then the last one is, now have a stuck slide here. There we go. Corporate owned life insurance. Voila. So we're going to talk about what that looks like first. So financing alternatives around corporate owned life insurance. If you look at the first column, the cash value in the life insurance accumulates tax deferred. So what does that mean? That means it's there, it's inside your policy, and you're going to receive a dividend from the life insurance company. It's going to look at what you currently have paid in terms of insurance costs. And then it's going to say, okay, and so this is your portion. We're going to give you the dividend. We recommend that you use a mutual insurance company only because they are owned by the policyholders, right? So there's no shareholders in those companies. They have a tendency to outperform a public life insurance company. Mutual companies would be things like Northwestern, Mass Mutual, New York Life, PAC Life, things like that, which, again, we're, as peer groups, we're licensed in all that, or Dan Crowley individually is licensed in all that, also licensed in all 50 states. So the ability to kind of go after any type of plan or any kind of financing option is doable inside peer groups. So always remember that. Favorable access to cash value. Favorable access to cash value. Okay, so I think what that means is you're going to be able to borrow that cash value out of the policy. You're not going to have a tax impact on that. You're going to withdraw the cash value out of the policy. So the insurance company will work with you to make sure, once they know what your intention is for the policy, hey, I'm going to informally fund a defined benefit non-qualified plan with this. They know what to do. They know what the laws are, what they can and can't do. Your accountant should also know that. If they don't, we have all of the current accounting laws around this, and we present that to our members if they put these types of plans in place. And this is very efficient for long-term plans. I tell people from doing this so many times, I usually find that if I put 30 cents in today, it's going to give me $1 in benefit later. It seems to be that's the ratio of how it works. I might have a person who has 10 years left in their career with you. And you might say, okay, my gosh, what if I want to give that person $300,000 in benefit? And they're only got 10 years. Well, that gives you 10 years to kind of build it up. So what I find is that it will probably cost you about 100 grand over the 10 years, which is 10 grand a year, which, do the math on that in terms of what you're doing in terms of an hourly rate. It's essentially giving the person a $5 an hour raise for the last 10 years of their tenure with you, but it gives them a $300,000 pension, right? So you can kind of do the math on all sorts of scenarios and determine what works. If you have somebody who's 25 and you really like this person, you've developed them, you might say, well, I want that person to have $500,000. And if they stay all the way through their career and work for me, it's almost as if they're an owner, right? They're getting $500,000 payout. That typically would run somewhere in the range of $150,000. But because they're 25 and they have 40 years to work in the company to get that to that point, do the math on it, right? So, 40 year, 175,000 or 150,000 divided by 40 years is essentially what your annual cost would be. So we just had a plan that went in December for a person who had 20 years still working in the company. And I think they got like $1.50 raise that we then shoved into the deferred comp plan. And now they went home and shared with their spouse that, hey, I'm going to get $250,000 as long as I retire from the company. So it's something to keep in mind on how that might work. The cons related to corporate owned life insurance. There is insurance related costs, i.e. there's a death benefit, right? So the minute you get the policy, the person could die the next day and you guys get this huge death benefit in your company. Keep in mind that you own this policy. You're the payer on the premium and you are the beneficiary in case of death. So that's why there's an insurance related cost. What we typically find is by the time you get to year 10 or 12 or something like that, your premiums that you have paid into the company at that point are equivalent to your cash values. Now there's ways to hurry that up and get it done, get over break even at year 7 or something like that. And we can share that another time, or if we have time later on this call, we can talk about that. But essentially, the important thing that you should know is that the insurance costs are eventually paid up pretty quickly. And then your returns are great. Like we were doing the math on it, and it looks like some of the plans we put in 8 years ago, we're getting to that point where, we might see a 12% return on the cash that's inside of the policy. And that's pretty good because it's tax-free growth, right? So we're not saying it was, we're saying that the 12% in a qualified plan would have to then be taxed on the proceeds. This is not taxed. This just keeps building up inside of the policy. So it allows you to go really fast and grow some serious cash in the policy. The other negative is underwriting. So we have had many cases where an individual might not fit the profile of somebody who's insurable. And so I go back to the owner and I said, Jim's not insurable. He's a smoker and he's 200 pounds overweight. We're not going to be able to get him insured. So we still have ways to work around that. We do a thing called aggregate life insurance funding, informal funding. And so like we had a super healthy, non-tobacco 25-year-old in Texas who we put $3 million of life insurance on. And the insurance company was okay with it because they knew we were using aggregate life insurance. We were saying, we're going to put this life insurance on this gentleman to fund these 3 to 4 different plans that are going to be happening for 3 to 4 other people. So a person who might not be insurable can still participate in these plans. Something to keep in mind. There's carrier selection risks. So again, you could go to anybody you want to do this. If anybody doesn't know this, your insurance agent who sells you insurance, they're providing you with a commodity. They can't charge you less or more. Very small amounts of, in terms of designing a solution around life insurance, there's nothing one insurance agent can do other than another person, except for if they don't know about executive benefit usage and how to do this. But I will say that you can make a mistake and choose the wrong carrier if one carrier is averaging 7% on a dividend, another carrier gets 3%, then clearly you're just missing the boat. You want to take advantage of whatever's the best return you can get. So you just want to be aware of that. Subject to AMT, again, there's going to be a tax on the benefit. There are some things like as you get your insurance policies, we go through that with you and make sure that you understand what all those rules are. So what are we doing here? Got a little bit of time. So let's talk about an example here in a minute. I'm just going to give you a couple more COLI advantages. It's usually used for SERPs. You got the tax deferred cash value, where we talked about that. It's income tax-free death proceeds. So what does this mean? So if I'm using life insurance and somebody dies while they're an employee, the death benefit goes to the company tax-free. And I think you know that from your own life insurance, right? So I get my benefit tax-free. If you take some of that money and then share it with the employee's family, they then pay tax on their portion of it. But the company itself doesn't pay any tax on it. And again, the cash value growth we already covered. Death proceeds reduce overall plan costs. That's a pretty interesting piece. I never thought about this. I really haven't positioned it, but I'm going to show you in this next example that like you may use this to fund this retention plan. The way we design it, we don't really ever kill the policy. So what does that mean? So that means that we're taking all this money out, we're borrowing off the policy to pay the benefit to the employee, but the death benefit still exists with the policy. So you hold the policy, the company holds the policy. When the individual does die, because it is a permanent policy, it's a matter of when, that proceed comes to the company tax free. So that offsets some of the cost of the plan. And it's something that everybody should be aware of. Even if you're not planning on being around 40 years from now, it's important that anybody going forward, here's the value of this asset. Remember this, that type of thing. So key person example. So there is going to be, first let's talk about the design assumptions. So the design assumptions on this example is that we have elected a defined contribution benefit design, that the company gets taxed 30% on any kind of income they may have. And we're also going to have the assumption that the employer contributes $15,000 a year to this account until the employee reaches the age of 65. So those are some assumptions around this particular design. We also are going to say, you know, Suzanne's going to get paid in 20 annual installments as part of her plan. So this is not a defined benefit. We didn't say this is going to create $500,000. Right now, we're just saying we're going to take 15 grand and we're going to shove it into this policy and see where it ends up. So let's talk now about, so that's the design. Now let's talk about how we're going to fund it. So let's talk about the insurance side. So the assumption is, well, Suzanne's age 35. We're going to do one insurance policy on Suzanne, and she's also a non-smoker and she's pretty healthy. So we're expecting to get a pretty good underwriting recognition. We're going to choose to use a permanent life policy. There are other policies you can use. We have done what is called an indexed universal policy, and I'll be glad to talk to you about that offline. It's just another option. Some people, it's tied to the market. It may have a better result. It may not, but so it's a little more risky, maybe a little better return, but we can talk about that if anybody has interest. This one has the current expenses and charges related to a permanent life policy, and it also creates a dividend every year. And that's where we build up the cash. So we know that we're going to put $10,000 into the premium, but we also are going to throw another 5 grand. So the 10 grand covers the cost of the insurance, normal policy, 10 grand. Just like you can make a payment on your mortgage, an extra payment on your mortgage, we're going to throw another $5,000 to accelerate the cash value. So we had a gentleman, you know, some of you guys might know Lance, just mentioned by name. So Lance had a plan that he created where he's like, I want to stuff money into a policy so that my key person is going to have really quickly a huge benefit because we might sell our business at some point in the next 3 to 5 years. So he wanted to really make sure that the thing got loaded up quickly. And so that was an example of, you know, a design on the COLI side that allowed you to build up a lot of cash very quickly. And then the employer recovers the after-tax retirement benefit cost from the policy's cash values. That's a big deal. So over the course of the payout, you might be paying somebody, gosh, we don't even know because this is a defined contribution, but let's just say it's 10 grand. They might be getting $10,000 and they pay tax on that amount. Well, you're getting you're going to take the tax deduction on the 10 grand, right? Because it's just like paying them salary at that point. So I'm going to try to go through this slow. This is not a journal entry. It looks like a journal entry. It's not a journal entry. It's just a bunch of numbers on a piece of paper. So I want to make sure that we're aware of that to begin with. So the first thing is we talked about the SERP design. Here is the SERP payout. So now the person's hit retirement age and they've started to get the payouts. The way this works is you're going to say, okay, as a company, what did we pay in SERP? And you'll see that it shows $1 million for $1,048,000, right? That was paid. Well, what does that mean? Well, the benefit that the individual received, believe it or not, for that 15 grand that was done over that period of time was they got paid 1.588 million. Okay, so that's what the employee got. What happens is you get the tax deduction on that. And because you get the tax deduction, you actually don't need the 1.588, you need the 1.048. So the cumulative tax savings is 540,000. That's your deduction on the payout of the 1.588. So they get W-2 of 1.588. It's a pretty big benefit, actually. They're obviously a pretty decent pension. The cost to the company is $1,048,000. Now, next stage is, well, how did our financing do? Did we come up with that amount of money? Do we have that money to, how did that look? So now we're looking at that and we're saying, okay, well, we received $1.457 million. Well, what do you mean we received that? Well, let's talk about what that means. So we paid out 600,000 in premiums, right? The 15,000 every single year for the period of years, whatever it was, 600,000 was paid out. We took out of those cash values. So this is sitting on the balance sheet. It's just an asset on the balance sheet, or a loan, or I'm sorry, a life insurance policy with cash in it. We're pulling out of that 1,048,000, because remember, we don't need to pull out the whole 1.588. We just need to pull out what, net of our deduction that we're going to get. So we need to pull $1 million out of the policy. No reason to pull more than that out because of, the 12 months, like technically there's a timing issue on the 12 months of when you get that deduction. But if you're able to do that with operating cash and you leave the policy alone, you're only pulled $1,048,000 out of that policy. The policy is still fat. So if the individual dies at age 85, you receive a check for $1.8 million tax-free. So what that means is that between those three numbers, the premium paid out of 600 grand, $1 million in cash comes out. Oh, and then another $1 million comes out. So that nets out to 1.457. So the net result of this particular SERP is 408,000. So you say, well, what the heck are you talking about, Dan? What I'm saying is this company, by giving this person 1.588 million, they netted 408,000 themselves. So it was a free plan. It was and this doesn't happen in every plan, but based on the assumptions I gave you, I'm showing you that this is the reason why corporate America, if you have an annual report for Coca-Cola, if you go look at anybody's annual report, they have SERPs all over the place because they know it's a churning situation where if you can afford to be the bank on this, you end up making money and creating these massive deferred comp plans for people. It's kind of a cool thing, right? So, I would recommend that if you choose to do this going forward, you force me to do this exercise with you on your policy and your design, because I can tell you without a doubt, almost everybody at least breaks even on it. But I would say that, this one showing a 408,000 of money made, giving 1.58 to my key person, right? So it's kind of crazy. Now, the other piece that I just stuck in here at the bottom is it's important to know, like, this is an illustration on an insurance. There is a projected cash value at retirement. So instead of getting paid 1.588 over whatever that was, 20 years, they could elect to take the lump sum, right? Just like a lottery ticket. So this is what the lump sum would have been, 952. So hopefully that's clear. I always love the lump sum option. Because the pension payout is intimidating to everybody. It's kind of like, oh man, they're not even an employee and I've got to write a check every year for 20 years or 10 years or whatever you elect it to be. I always like say, put that number in it because it's a big number usually, because time value of money. You can see getting 1.6 million in a pension versus getting 958 in a lump sum, that looks better But at the end of the day, always give them the option to take that amount a different way. So that's an example. I went through it. We only had an hour to go over this. I think we have a small crew here. So anybody have any questions? Or I know I didn't cover everything related to this. We talk about phantom stock and things like that too.
I have a question.
Yes, Michelle, I knew I could count on you. I knew it was coming. I'm like, Michelle's going to say something.
So right now we actually have a 401k plan. Now, how does this work? Because I know that money can't be used at all for something like this. Have you had that for any other companies? Do you just keep guys in the 401 and do a new plan for new hires?
Sure. So keep in mind there are usually two different goals. The 401k plan is something that you contribute to, and you're building up a retirement for them, and they're earning it as they go. So it's not like, for the most part, they're vested right away on the qualified money. The government makes sure of that. It's ERISA governed. There's all sorts of rules and rules to the road on that. It's very healthy. What you find, though, is a lot of people don't participate on the levels they want. They take their salary and they don't want to contribute themselves. They'll take whatever you give them, and certainly it then benefits you. So we always recommend to our owners that you go ahead and take advantage of it, and you max it as best you can, safe harbor, whatever you need to do to make sure that you as an individual can benefit while making it available to your employees. But it is not necessarily golden handcuff. So we're looking at it like I just had a person in one of the groups who turned 70 this winter. And they're like, you know what? I wasn't there last year. I was there for like, I don't know, maybe a month at best. And he goes, I don't want to lose those two key people. They're running my systems. So I know I can replace them, but ultimately I don't want them to leave. I don't want to be, 72 years old and try to replace them. So we put the SERP in on them within a month, and it was like, lock them in, lock them in, lock them in. And now the person is obviously more comfortable. And we were able to do it relatively inexpensive because they were somewhat young. They were in their 40s, which is young, not to you, but to me. So, I think that was a way to do it. So my recommendation, stick with the 401k, pump it, to take advantage for yourself. And then make this as another alternative for key people. Other questions?
Dan,
yeah.
So if you vest an employee, let's say I've got a mechanic and I say, hey, in 10 years, you're vested, and he ends up leaving at 8 years, how does the policy transfer to another? It transfers back to the company? Can you use that?
So just so you know, the policy is never in the hands of the employee. The insurance policy in this design, there's another way you can do it where the employee owns it. And that's a whole nother type of plan, and I'll be glad to talk about that offline. But what we do is we make sure that Target Rental owns the policy. If a person doesn't reach the vesting period, then it's like a bank account. It just continues. You continue to make the premium payments. It continues to build in value. If the person dies somewhere out there, you'll get notified as a policy owner and you'll get a death benefit. But, it bothers some people because they're like, oh man, Todd Smith hasn't been part of this company in years and I still see his name on this policy. So there are ways that you can, kill a policy, port money over, whatever you might need to do. I don't recommend you do anything. I say leave it be and let it build up the cash value for somebody else, because you can create what is called an in-force illustration. I can take any policy and find out the growth projected over the next 20, 30 years. So then all I do is I build a spreadsheet and I take a new person, Mary Smith, who ends up, being a different age, and we write up the design. And so as I see when she's vesting, I just make sure that the cash is going to match it right now. We just had a company contact us an hour and a half ago that already has 4 policies in place. And so now they're like, well, we never put this person in. And so that person's got to go in. We already had done pre-designs on it. I know how much they want. I can look at the existing policies and say, well, you know, Matthew left the company, so we have some cash here to work with. So it's just a financing element. That the policy is actually not anything other than an investment, although we can't say the word investment. It's actually an asset.
Okay.
The key is when they become vested. So if they're vested at 10 years and you reach 10 years, now the question is, they're vested, when do they get the payout? Do they get the payout at retirement, or do they get the payout because I vested and now I want to leave you, so you need to make good and give me that money? So that's part of the design. So when we go through the design process, we work through all those scenarios and we say, well, what about this and what about that, and make all those things be part of it. What else? Any other questions? Jen has no questions for me. It must be Wednesday doing the books. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody coming out, and certainly, you know, there's different other styles of this that can be done. You heard Jim mention, well, what if the employee owns the insurance policy? That is a design. So I can share that with you in a future breakout session. Also, one thing I want to leave you with is a number of companies look at this plan as an exit. So we have a document called SERP for Succession, which allows a person, and actually we're working on this right now with somebody, where they've been contributing for 8 years. The person is almost vested, and the amount of money that's available is pretty significant. So we're talking about having that person sign over their plan to the owner. The owner gets that money because they were going to be vested in another year or two or something. So the owner gets the money, and that becomes a down payment. The bank comes in behind it and does the deal. So the bank supports the employee buying out the owner. Now that can't be done with everybody, but it can be done with some smaller operations. And then the last piece I'll say is we just did a deal with Promise Financial, which is Joel Gilley. Some of you might know that name, where he creates sinking funds with these plans. What that means is you're actually creating massive policies with huge premiums, and the banks are financing those insurance policies for the specific reason of an owner wanting to exit with $5 million. And it allows his employees to take over ownership. It's not necessarily called a, employee-owned ESOP. It's not an ESOP, but it is a way for a sinking fund to be created for the owner to exit, and the employees become the owners with bank backing. It's pretty neat. So we're having him actually create a case on that. We're going to push it out to the different groups so everybody has one.
So the SERP acts like collateral on the business transition?
Yeah, when the banks agree to finance a policy, what happens is you're making a payment to the bank. They're paying the bigger premium. And because they're paying the bigger premium, the cash value goes up really quickly inside the policy, which collateralizes the whole thing. And then the bank says, okay, we can step back out of the initial deal, and now we'll do the deal to finance the exit of the owner. So they have the insurance as collateral, but they also, the actual employees and the owner who's exiting have used the initial impact to get to 25% or whatever equity into the hands of the employees. So something to think about, those two types of exits. But yeah, we'll have something on that. The sinking fund, we'll be doing that next. So you guys will see that. So thanks for coming, everybody. And feel free to be in touch.
Thank you.
Take care,
thanks,
guys.
Dan.
This will be posted. This is recorded and posted if anybody needs it.
Okay.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.